Why Hard Work Rarely Makes You Rich. Full audiobook. Chapter 1, The Myth of Hard Work. You were told since childhood that hard work was the golden ticket. Your parents, your teachers, even the voices on television repeated the same chant. If you wake up early, labor with discipline, and never complain, success will eventually arrive. But you have probably noticed that life does not honor that promise. The streets are filled with men and women who gave their bodies and their best years to honest labor, only to reach old age exhausted, with little more than survival to show for it. The myth of hard work is powerful because it feels moral and noble. Yet, when you examine the evidence, it collapses under its own weight. Imagine a factory worker in the 1980s. He arrives before sunrise, clocks in, and spends 12 hours on the assembly line. Every motion is precise, repeated thousands of times. At the end of the week, he receives a paycheck that barely covers rent, groceries, and utilities. If he works harder, staying overtime, he may add a few extra dollars. But even with decades of loyalty, his income remains trapped inside the narrow cage of wages. This is not a story of laziness or irresponsibility. It is a story of the invisible ceiling that pure labor imposes. No matter how many hours you trade, there are only 24 in a day, and your body cannot stretch beyond its limits. This myth survives because it flatters our sense of fairness. It tells you that the universe is balanced, that sweat will be rewarded. The problem is that money does not flow according to effort. It flows according to value creation and ownership. Picture two individuals. One spends 60 hours a week driving a delivery van. The other owns the fleet of vans. At the end of the year, the driver has earned perhaps $40,000, while the owner has taken home 10 times that amount. Both worked, but the results were not even remotely similar. You may feel that the owner did not work as hard, and you would be right. What he did was position himself to capture the fruits of many people's labor. You might recall a janitor who cleans offices late at night. His routine is grueling. He bends his back over endless corridors, scrubbing and polishing until the smell of chemicals clings to his skin. He earns just enough to pay bills, maybe send a small amount back to his family. Meanwhile, the executive who passes through those same hallways spends his evenings at dinners and strategy meetings. The janitor may sweat more in a single night than the executive does in a week, yet the income of the executive can exceed $500,000 a year. This contrast is not about fairness. It is about systems that assign disproportionate rewards to control, decisions, and capital. Think of Maria, a woman who immigrated with dreams of building a better life. She took every job offered, from kitchens to construction sites, stacking shift upon shift. For 10 years, she worked with relentless energy. She never took a vacation, never bought luxuries, and still found herself one emergency away from debt. Across the street lived her neighbor David, who spent his 20s learning how to invest in small rental properties. His mornings often started later. His evenings were freer, but his bank account grew while Maria stagnated. She worked harder, but he worked on leverage. Maria was faithful to myth, and the myth betrayed her. The belief that effort alone produces wealth also ignores historical evidence. Consider the millions of miners, farmers, and factory workers across the 19th and 20th centuries. They gave entire lifetimes of sweat. The riches generated by their toil created dynasties, but not for them. Instead, fortunes accumulated in the hands of factory owners, landowners, and financiers. The myth of hard work made sense to those in power because it kept people docile, convinced that patience and loyalty would eventually pay off. In truth, it rarely did. And so you begin to see the cracks. If you cling to the story that sweat guarantees success, you set yourself up for disappointment. Hard work may build character, it may sustain your family, but it does not by itself create wealth. The myth comforts because it is simple and familiar, but wealth operates by different rules. Recognizing that difference is the first step toward rewriting your own story. You may look around and still see evidence that fuels the myth. The shopkeeper who opens a store every single morning without fail, the farmer who tills the same land from dawn until dusk, the nurse who works back-to-back shifts caring for strangers. They all radiate a sense of dignity and perseverance. And yet, if you study their bank accounts, you rarely find wealth. What you find instead is a cycle of bills paid, debts managed, and modest survival. The truth that stares back at you is that hard work sustains life, but it does not multiply it. Wealth requires multiplication, and multiplication requires something beyond sweat.
Think of the carpenter in a small town. He builds furniture by hand, pouring oars into each piece. The quality is sick, his reputation solid, but his income is chant to how many chairs or tables his two hands can finish. Even if he works every waking hour, there is a ceiling he cannot break. Now imagine another man in the same town who learns how to design a simple chair and contracts a factory to produce 1,000 copies a month. The carpenter might spend 60 hours a week in his workshop, while the designer spends only 20 hours managing production, yet the latter earns 10 times more. This is not because the carpenter lacks skill or effort, it is because his labor does not scale. The myth seduces you with the premise that sacrifice will one day be recognized. It suggests that if you push harder, stay later, and take fewer breaks, fortune will eventually notice. But money is blind to effort. It only follows flows of value, ownership, and leverage. That is why you often see lottery winners, heirs, or entrepreneurs who appear lazy compared to the relentless worker, yet all the keys to abundance. The janitor scrubbing floors may never meet the bonuses that a mid-level executive receives simply for hitting a quarterly target. This inequality is not moral, it is systemic. Consider a story from a neighborhood in 1995. A woman named Evelyn worked double shifts at a textile factory, sometimes logging more than 70 hours a week. Her hands were calloused, her back ached constantly, and her wages for the year barely crossed $70,000. Across town, her cousin Samuel had purchased a small commercial building and rented it out to local businesses. He invested time in learning about property management, but his weekly effort was minimal compared to Evelyn's. By the end of the same year, Samuel collected over $80,000 in rental income. Evelyn carried the meat on her shoulders, while Samuel leveraged ownership. The gap between them widened not because one was moral and the other was not, but because their choices placed them in entirely different financial games. You might feel resistance to this idea because it seems to dishonor the integrity of labor. After all, society praises the worker, celebrates discipline, and holds up hard work as virtue. And in the end, work is virtuous, it builds resilience, teaches lessons, and shapes character. But when it comes to financial results, virtue does not guarantee prosperity. If it did, the hardest workers would be the richest, and history proves the opposite. The wealthiest figures were rarely the ones who labored the longest hours, they were the ones who positioned themselves to receive the fruits of many people's labor. This realization is not meant to shame you but to free you. When you break the spell of the myth, you begin to question where your hours are going and what those hours are producing beyond wages. You see that continuing to pour more sweat into the same structure will not alter the outcome. You recognize that change requires a shift in how you think about effort itself, not as the final ingredient of wealth, but as raw energy that must be directed toward ownership, systems, and leverage. Only then does your work transform from endless exertion into something that compounds. Chapter 2: The Limits of Labor. You can only set the hours you have. That truth sits silently in the background of every job you have ever worked, whether you noticed it or not. Each sunrise gives you 24 hours, and no matter how disciplined, how committed, or how desperate, you cannot stretch the day into 25. You cannot split yourself into two bodies. Your time is a finite currency, and once you understand that, the entire premise of becoming rich through sheer labor begins to look impossible. Picture a nurse named Caroline in the year 2003. She works at a hospital in the city, clocking 40 hours a week on paper, though in reality her shifts often run long. Her paycheck reads about $50,000 a year. To improve her situation, she takes on extra shifts, pushing her hours closer to 60. At the end of the year, she earns nearly $65,000. On the surface, this seems like progress, but underneath, her body is paying the cost. She sleeps less, eats poorly, and her relationships fry. More hours produced slightly more income, but it pushed her life closer to breaking. Multiply this pattern by decades, and you see why exhaustion, burnout, and debt often arrive long before wealth. Labor as a ceiling because your body and your team form hard limits. You cannot make more of them, no matter how strong your will. Even overtime is borrowed energy, taken from health or family. Yet we grow up hearing phrases like harder work brings greater rewards. That phrase ignores math. 10 more hours might bring an extra few $100, but those hours vanished forever, while your bills remain loyal. You might feel proud of the effort, and rightfully so, but financial transformation does not arrive simply because you bring the last ounce of energy from yourself. Consider the example of Peter, a delivery driver in 1998. He drove for 50 hours a week and earned around $75,000 that year. When his wife became pregnant, he added another 15 hours of overtime every week, believing that sacrifice could open the door to stability. By the end of the year, his earnings rose to about $45,000. The extra $10,000 came at the expense of every weekend, of his health, and of moments he could never replace. His son's first steps were witnessed by his exhausted wife alone. He was chasing more hours, but the ceiling never truly moved. The trade remained fixed, hours for money, body for survival. Now look at the mathematics more closely. Imagine you earn $20 an hour. If you work 40 hours per week, that is $800. Double your hours to 80, and you make pull in $1,600. On paper, that seems promising. But 80 hours means no rest, no family life, no margin for illness. The week bleeds into exhaustion. And still, at the end of the month, your income totals around $6,400. Respectable, but nowhere near wealth. It cannot buy freedom, it cannot buy time, and it certainly cannot create lasting security. The ceiling stands firm, no matter how hard you press against it.
The cruelest part of this trap is that society praises you while you break yourself. Your boss admires your dedication. Your neighbors call you responsible. Yet none of that praise pays off your mortgage faster. None of it grows into financial independence. What you receive is applause for sacrifice, not ownership of freedom. You must recognize that the game is rigged to celebrate effort, while quietly ensuring you remain bound to wages. Labor has another hidden limit: dependence. If your employer closes doors tomorrow, if illness steals your ability to stand, your income disappears instantly. All the hard work from yesterday does not carry forward into tomorrow. You start back at zero because labor does not accumulate. It evaporates at the end of each shift. Contrast that with ownership, where one decision years ago may still be paying you today. Labor stops when you stop. Ownership continues. To humanize this, imagine Rosa, a seamstress who lived in a crowded neighborhood. She stitched clothes from morning until late at night, managing nearly 70 hours every week. Her hands were rough, her eyes strained, but she was respected for her resilience. Then one winter, arthritis began to stiffen her fingers. Overnight, her ability to work collapsed. With it went her income, her security, and the small dreams she carried. Decades of hard labor did not build her a safety net. It only wore her body down until it could no longer continue. That is the brutal truth of the limits of labor. You may take pride in your work ethic, and you should. Effort is honorable. But when you mistake labor for wealth, you condemn yourself to ceilings you can never break. Your hours will always be finite. Your energy will always deplete. And your wage, no matter how loyal or diligent, will rarely stretch into freedom. Seeing this clearly does not weaken you. It liberates you. Because once you recognize the cage, you can begin searching for keys. You may have noticed how conversations about money often circle around the same advice. Take on another job, accept more overtime, pick up weekend shifts. These solutions seem reasonable because they are immediate. You work more, you earn more. But hidden in this cycle is a trap that slowly closes around you. Each additional hour brings diminishing returns, while your body and spirit carry the rising costs. You cannot endlessly trade health for wages and expect to emerge wealthy. What you build instead is fatigue. Let us revisit the story of Caroline, the nurse who stretched her hours to reach $65,000 a year. On paper, she appeared stable. In reality, she was running a deficit of energy. Her blood pressure rose, her diet deteriorated, and she began to dread every alarm clock. The hospital administration benefited from her sacrifice, yet she had nothing compounding on her behalf. The day she missed a shift, the paycheck shrank. When illness finally forced her into leave, the income vanished altogether. Labor at its core is fragile because it ties your survival to your presence. If you are absent, the money disappears. Think now of construction workers who brave scorching heat or bitter cold. They climb scaffolding, carry heavy loads, and risk injury daily. Many earn decent hourly wages, sometimes $30 or even $40 per hour. Yet their annual income rarely climbs past $70,000. They rely on bodies that wear down faster than their mortgages shrink. And when their knees give out or their backs fail, the wages stop. Decades of sweat yield little security, because the system does not allow labor compound into freedom. Numbers clarify the trap. Suppose you earn $30 an hour and work 50 hours weekly. That provides $75,000 annually before taxes. You push harder, adding 10 more hours per week, grinding through evenings and weekends. The new total rises to $90,000. On the surface, an improvement. But to sustain that pace, you sacrifice relationships, sleep, and sanity. And still, you remain within 5 figures, not even close to building lasting wealth. The ceiling stays firm, reminding you that more hours do not create escape velocity. They only accelerate burnout. Consider the story of Daniel. In 2008, he drove trucks across long distances, sometimes logging 80 hours weekly behind the wheel. His paychecks were larger than those of his friends who worked in offices, but his expenses rose alongside his exhaustion. Repairs on his truck, medical bills for chronic back pain, and hotel stays along routes devoured his earnings. When the financial crisis hit and deliveries slowed, Daniel's hours were cut in half. Suddenly, his income collapsed, and he realized that all the miles he had driven, all the nights he had sacrificed, had not built a cushion. His labor vanished with the market's demand. Labor also limits your imagination. When you are locked in survival mode, working shift after shift, you have little mental space left for creativity or strategy. The exhaustion from endless hours erodes your ability to step back and design a different path. You may dream of starting a side business, of investing, of learning new skills, but your body demands rest. The more you push, the less room remains to pivot. The very act of overworking keeps you chained to the same structure that drains you. Another dimension of the limit is scale. Labor does not multiply across thousands. One worker equals one set of hours. Even if you are the most disciplined, you cannot clone yourself. Ownership, in contrast, multiplies. A person who owns 5 rented units does not scrub floors in each of them. Tenants pay rent whether the owner works that week or not. A person who holds shares in a company receives dividends distributed across millions of workers' efforts, not just his own. That is why the richest rarely spend the most hours laboring. They spend their hours designing systems that others operate. Think of Gloria, who cleaned houses in the suburbs for 20 years. She earned steady wages, enough to cover rent and food. She rarely complained, priding herself on her discipline. But at 60 years old, arthritis limited her hands, and she could not keep up with the demands. Retirement savings were almost non-existent. Meanwhile, one of her clients, a woman who worked fewer hours managing an online business, had built a portfolio of properties and investments that generated income around the clock. Gloria's body had reached its limit, but the other woman's wealth kept growing, indifferent to time or health. When you step back, the conclusion is unavoidable. Labor has limits that you cannot outmuscle. Time is capped at 24 hours. Energy depletes with age. Wages rarely scale. Illness can erase years of sacrifice, and the applause society offers for hard work often hides the fact that your sacrifices serve systems designed to benefit someone else. You must see labor for what it is, honorable but insufficient. It sustains, but it does not liberate. The path to wealth requires something beyond the raw exchange of hours for pay. Until you accept the limits of labor, you will remain caught inside its cage. Chapter 3: Money versus Value. You grew up believing that money and value were the same thing. If someone earned a large paycheck, it meant their work was valuable. If another earned very little, it meant their work was not. But once you look closely, you see that money and value do not always align. In fact, many of the most valuable contributions to society are paid the least, while activities that generate little real benefit sometimes bring massive rewards. This gap between money and value is a secret you must understand if you want to escape the trap of working endlessly without progress. Consider the teacher who shapes young minds every day. She spends her mornings explaining mathematics, her afternoons grading papers, and her evenings preparing lessons. Her influence stretches into the future of hundreds of students. Yet at the end of the year, her income may barely reach $50,000. Now compare her to a marketing executive who spends his time analyzing campaigns, tweaking slogans, and organizing advertisements. His work, while important to a company's profits, does not carry the same moral weight as shaping a child's education. Still, his annual income may be $200,000 or more. The difference is not about moral value, but about market value. Markets reward what generates profit, not necessarily what serves society. This distinction becomes clearer when you look at specific numbers. Imagine a street musician who spends 4 hours playing violin in a busy plaza. Passers-by toss coins into his case. At the end of the evening, he counts $80. His performance brought joy, atmosphere, and a memory to hundreds of strangers, yet the market only valued it at $80. Meanwhile, across town, a software developer wrote code that automated an advertisement placement system. That code now drives millions of dollars in sales for a corporation. The developer may receive a salary of $120,000 a year, not because his work enriches lives in a deep way, but because it creates financial leverage for his employer. The trap most people fall into is confusing personal effort with financial reward. You think that if you pour more of yourself into your job, the company will pay you more. But wages are not determined by how much you give. They are determined by how replaceable you are and how much profit your role creates. If 10 other people could do your job tomorrow, your value in the market is low, no matter how hard you work. But if your contribution directly affects millions of dollars in revenue, you can negotiate far higher pay, even if the work itself feels lighter. Take the story of Julian, a cook in a small diner during 2011. He arrived before sunrise, chopped vegetables, fried eggs, and scrubbed pans until midnight. His weekly paycheck was $450. Across town, his childhood friend Anna had built a small online store selling handmade jewelry. She started by working evenings, photographing items, and writing descriptions. Within 2 years, the store was generating over $80,000 annually. Julian worked harder, sweating and sacrificing, but Anna had created value that scaled beyond her hours. Her photographs and descriptions worked even while she slept. The difference lay not in how much they worked, but in how their work translated into value recognized by the market. You must ask yourself, are you being paid for the time you spend or for the value you create? If it is only time, then your income will always be capped. If it is value, then there is room for expansion because value can scale. A song streamed by millions, a book read by thousands, an application used by businesses worldwide. These are creations that multiply without demanding more hours each day. That is why an author can write 1 book in a year and collect royalties for decades, while another person may work 60 hours a week forever and never see the same return. This shift in perspective may feel uncomfortable. You were taught to equate wages with worth. But once you separate money from value, you can begin to see opportunities that were invisible before. Instead of asking, how can I work more? You begin to ask, how can I create value that multiplies? That question alone can transform the direction of your life. Because in the end, wealth is not the reward for hours logged. It is a result of value generated and owned. You may already sense that the marketplace rewards something different from raw labor. It rewards outcomes that generate profit, outcomes that scale, and outcomes that solve pressing problems for many people at once. This is why 2 people can stand side by side, both working diligently, yet one earns barely enough to survive while the other becomes wealthy. The distinction is not how many hours they worked, but how the market perceived the value of their contribution. Think of Samuel, a janitor who worked at a corporate office building in 1999. He arrived every evening, vacuumed the carpets, emptied trash bins, polished the floors, and left after midnight. The building sparkled because of him, and everyone who entered the next morning benefited from his unseen effort. Yet his annual salary never crossed $30,000. At the very same company, an employee in the marketing department designed a slogan that caught public attention. That slogan increased product sales by $5 million in a single year. The marketer earned a six-figure bonus on top of an already generous salary. Both Samuel and the marketer worked hard, but the market rewarded the creation of scalable profit rather than the maintenance of cleanliness. This is not to diminish the dignity of labor. Every role matters. But when you confuse dignity with financial reward, you remain blind to the rules of the system. The market does not ask how noble your task is. It asks how much money your task generates or protects. That is why a surgeon who performs life-saving operations may earn $500,000 annually, while a paramedic who rushes to the scene, often risking his life, may earn less than $50,000. The difference lies in perceived value and scarcity of skill, not in courage or sacrifice. Numbers reveal this gap with even more clarity. Suppose you're a barista at a coffee shop, earning $15 an hour. In a 40-hour week, that brings you $600, which translates to around $31,000 a year. Now imagine you own the coffee shop. You sell 200 drinks a day at an average price of $4. That is $800 in daily revenue. Over 300 working days, you generate $240,000 in sales. Even after expenses, the owner might take home $80,000 or more, nearly triple what the barista earns. The difference is not hours worked, but ownership of value. The barista provides labor. The owner captures value from the system. Consider Elena, a graphic designer in 2015. She worked at an advertising agency, creating logos and visuals for campaigns. Her salary hovered around $55,000 annually. After years of frustration, she began taking freelance projects directly with clients. One of her designs was purchased by a startup that later grew rapidly, raising millions in investment. Elena still earned only her agreed fee of $3,000 for that project, while the startup founders saw their company valued at $50 million. Elena provided value, but did not own it. Once again, the rules of money rewarded ownership over labor. You must understand that wealth is not a mirror of effort. It is a reflection of who owns the value being produced. When you sell your hours, you give away the value to someone else. They package it, scale it, and collect the rewards. You receive a wage that barely reflects your contribution. But when you shift your focus toward creating and owning value, you step into a different equation entirely. Your work stops being measured by hours and starts being measured by outcomes that multiply. Think about a songwriter who pens a single hit tune. He may spend only 2 months writing and refining the lyrics and melody. Once recorded, that song streams worldwide, played millions of times on radios, platforms, and concerts. For years, royalties flow back to the songwriter. Compare that to a taxi driver who spends 60 hours a week on the road for decades. The driver may earn $40,000 a year, with no continuation once he stops. The songwriter, on the other hand, created a piece of value that continues to generate money without demanding new hours. This is why you must learn to see differently. When you look at opportunities, do not ask only, how much will they pay me for my time? Ask instead, what value am I creating, who owns it, and can it multiply? Because wealth always flows to those who create and own value that extends beyond themselves. Until you internalize this truth, you will forever confuse the dignity of work with the mechanics of money, and the two are not the same. Chapter 4, The Power of Leverage. You cannot lift a mountain with your bare hands, but place the right lever in the right position, and suddenly the impossible becomes possible. Wealth works the same way. Hard work is a pair of hands digging into the soil, but leverage is the tool that multiplies every motion. Without leverage, your effort remains trapped within your body and your hours. With leverage, your effort expands far beyond what you alone could ever achieve. Think about capital as the first form of leverage. Imagine Thomas, a man in 1975 who inherited $50,000 from his father. Instead of working double shifts, he used that sum to purchase shares in a growing manufacturing company. Within 5 years, those shares doubled in value and paid annual dividends of $5,000. He did not work an extra hour, yet the money itself went to work for him. Meanwhile, his cousin Michael labored 12-hour shifts at a steel plant, adding overtime whenever possible. After the same 5 years, Michael had little savings and a body already worn down. The difference was not morality or discipline. It was leverage. Thomas used capital as a force multiplier, while Michael relied only on his muscles. Technology is another form of leverage, and it may be the most democratizing in history. Consider a writer in 2002. She could publish her ideas only through a local newspaper, reaching perhaps 10,000 readers. Today, that same writer can publish online and reach millions across the globe. A single blog post, a video, or an app can spread endlessly without requiring her to repeat the work every day. The internet is leverage. It multiplies distribution so that one person's effort resonates in countless places simultaneously. Leverage also comes through people. One individual can sweep a floor, but a team can maintain an entire skyscraper. One salesperson can knock on doors, but a sales force of 100 can cover entire nations. Ownership of a system that coordinates people transforms your effort. This is why the owner of a business may appear to work fewer hours, but earns far more. He is not relying on his own back alone. He has multiplied his reach through others. To see the numbers, imagine 2 bakers. Sarah bakes bread by hand in her kitchen. She produces 50 loaves each day and sells them for $3 apiece. Her daily revenue is $150. She works tirelessly, but the ceiling is firm. Across town, David invests in equipment and hires assistants. His bakery produces 1,000 loaves a day, sold at the same $3 each. His daily revenue is $3,000. Sarah and David both love baking, but David applied leverage. He used capital for machines and people for scale, and his outcome grew 20 times larger than Sarah's. Leverage often hides in plain sight. Take real estate as an example. Suppose you have $100,000. You could buy one small property outright and collect rent of $600 per month. Or you could use that money as a down payment on 5 properties worth $500,000 combined, financed through mortgages. Each property might bring $600 in rent, creating $3,000 in monthly income. Debt, when used wisely, becomes leverage, allowing you to control assets larger than your initial capital. The risks exist, but the principle is clear. Leverage multiplies beyond what your hours or savings alone could manage. A story brings this alive. In 2010, Rachel was a graphic designer freelancing from her apartment. She handled every client herself, trading hours for pay. She earned around $40,000 annually. Her friend Marcus, also a designer, chose a different path. He hired 2 junior designers, rented a small office, and began accepting larger contracts. Within 3 years, Marcus's agency was earning over $200,000 annually, while Rachel still hovered near $40,000. Marcus was not more talented, nor did he work harder. He built leverage through people and systems. You may resist this truth because it feels unfair. Shouldn't the one who works harder earn more? But money does not care about effort. It cares about scale. A musician may play a guitar beautifully for a dozen people at a cafe, while another records the same song and streams it to millions. One walks home with $30 in tips. The other collects royalties that could last a lifetime. The difference is leverage. When you grasp the power of leverage, you begin to see why some people break free from the grind while others remain trapped. It is not luck, though chance plays a role. It is not inheritance alone, though capital helps. It is the ability to multiply effort through tools, money, people, and systems. Hard work without leverage is a candle in the wind. Hard work with leverage is a torch that lights entire cities. If you still doubt the force of leverage, picture 2 men starting businesses at the same time. Edward runs a small landscaping company, doing all the mowing, trimming, and hauling himself. He rises at sunrise, returns home after dark, and on a good month clears $4,000. Meanwhile, Jonathan builds a similar business, but immediately invests in 2 machines and hires 3 workers. He manages contracts, marketing, and schedules while his team handles the physical labor. Within a year, Jonathan is clearing $15,000 a month. Edward sweats more, but Jonathan earns more. That is leverage in human form. Leverage also explains why some ideas explode while others remain local. In 1997, Jeff Bezos was simply another entrepreneur. He could have opened a single bookstore in Seattle and spent his life arranging shelves. Instead, he used the leverage of technology, building a website that could reach millions. His hands never touched most of the books sold, yet value multiplied through servers, systems, and logistics. This is a defining difference between a store clerk who earns $30,000 a year and a founder whose net worth reaches billions. Both deal with books, but one relies on labor while the other relies on leverage. You may think the scale is beyond you, but leverage comes in smaller forms too. A young tutor named Lisa once charged $20 per hour to help students with algebra. Her time was limited to evenings after her own classes. She earned perhaps $200 a week. One summer, she recorded a full video course, uploaded it online, and priced it at $50. Over the next year, 2,000 students purchased it. She made $100,000 from work that once brought $200 a week. The difference was not talent or effort, but the ability to capture her knowledge in a format that scaled endlessly. That is a quiet miracle of leverage. It allows you to detach income from hours. Numbers bring the truth into sharp focus. Imagine you work in sales and can personally handle 20 clients a month, each bringing in $100 in commission. That is $2,000 monthly. But suppose you build a small team of 10 salespeople, each handling the same 20 clients. Your role shifts to training and leadership, yet suddenly the commission flowing into your pocket is $20,000 a month. The labor has multiplied tenfold, without you working 10 times more hours. Ownership of a system that coordinates people is what transforms modest incomes into fortunes. Another powerful form of leverage is media. One article published in a magazine decades ago might influence readers long after the author is gone. One song recorded in a studio continues playing across the globe without the artist lifting another finger. Social media multiplies this even more. A single video can be watched by millions overnight. The creator may have spent only 2 hours filming, yet the reach and impact are vast. Compare this to a motivational speaker who drives to schools, speaking to 100 students at a time. Both share messages, but one is bound by geography while the other leverages technology to expand infinitely. Debt, though often seen as dangerous, is leverage when used with precision. Suppose you save $50,000 and buy a small property outright. It rents for $800 monthly. Respectable but limited. Now imagine you use that $50,000 as down payment on 5 properties worth $250,000 each, financed by banks. Each unit rents for $800, generating $4,000 monthly. Even after paying mortgages, you may net $2,000 or more. The risk is higher, but the principle remains. Debt magnifies your reach beyond what your savings alone could purchase. This is why wealthy individuals often appear to own millions yet remain secure. They are not crushed by debt. They are empowered by leverage. A story makes this even clearer. In 2012, Martin worked as a photographer. He charged $500 per wedding, capturing beautiful moments but limited to how many weekends he could book. His friend Clara also loved photography but built a company that trained and hired other photographers under her brand. Within 3 years, her agency was photographing 30 weddings a weekend across multiple cities. She personally attended none of them. Clara earned over $500,000 annually, while Martin struggled to surpass $30,000. Both began with the same skill, but only one embraced leverage. The lesson is simple but profound. Hard work multiplies only when paired with leverage. Without it, you remain stuck exchanging hours for dollars, no matter how committed. With it, your hours spark ripples that move far beyond your presence. This is why leverage is a dividing line between survival and abundance. To ignore it is to remain trapped in effort. To embrace it is to step onto the path where wealth truly begins. Chapter 5. Building systems that work without you. If leverage is a force that multiplies effort, systems are the engines that keep that force running even when you're not around. Wealth is never built on your constant presence. It is built on structures that continue producing when you are asleep, traveling, or recovering from illness. Without systems, every dollar depends on your daily attendance. With systems, dollars arrive whether you show up or not. Imagine Robert, who owned a small bakery in 1989. He woke at 3 in the morning, kneaded dough, baked bread, sold loaves, and swept floors before locking the door at dusk. The bakery was beloved, but Robert was chained to it. Vacations were rare, sick days impossible. His income vanished the moment he failed to open the doors. A few blocks away, another baker named Charles had built his shop differently. He hired staff to handle production and sales, trained them carefully, and created procedures that anyone could follow. Charles still visited daily, but the bakery could run without him. When he took his family on a trip to the coast, bread still sold, customers still returned, and money still flowed. The contrast is stark. One bakery consumed its owner, the other liberated him. Systems transform fragile income into durable wealth. Consider an online store. If you pack boxes, print labels, and respond personally to every customer message, your earnings stop the moment you step away. But if you automate shipping through a fulfillment service, use software to track orders, and hire virtual assistants to answer emails, the store continues whether you log in or not. That is the essence of building systems, removing yourself as a bottleneck. Numbers illustrate this power. Suppose you run a tutoring service personally, charging $50 per session. With 20 students a week, you earn $1,000, but your time is capped. Now imagine you build a small company that recruits 10 tutors, each handling 20 students. You charge clients $50 and pay tutors $30 per session, keeping 20 as profit. Suddenly, your system generates $4,000 weekly, far beyond what your personal hours could reach. The students still receive lessons, the tutors still earn income, and you earn from the structure rather than the sessions. A story brings this to life. In 2006, Maria ran a tailoring shop. She sewed garments herself, staying late into the night to meet deadlines. Her annual income barely reached $40,000. After nearly burning out, she hired 2 apprentices and taught them her methods. She created templates, checklists, and schedules so the apprentices could handle most of the orders. Within 3 years, Maria managed a shop instead of sewing every garment. Her income doubled, then tripled. She discovered that teaching others and documenting processes allowed her to scale. Her presence was still valuable, but her absence no longer meant disaster. Systems are not just about business. They apply to personal finance too. A man who manually decides every month whether to save or invest will often fail. But someone who automates transfers, sets recurring investments, and structures bill payments builds a financial system that operates quietly in the background. 10 years later, one wonders why he is secure while the other remains unstable. The answer is simple. Systems protect consistency when willpower falters. Think of a farmer. If he waters each plant by hand, he is chained to the field. But if he installs irrigation pipes and timers, the crops receive water whether he stands there or not. The farmer who installs systems frees himself to expand, rest, or plan. The one without systems is a prisoner of his land. In wealth, as in farming, systems separate freedom from servitude. You may fear that building systems removes the soul from your work, but in truth, systems amplify your ability to serve. A teacher who records lessons once can reach thousands more than she could ever tutor individually. A restaurateur who trains staff with clear recipes and manuals ensures consistent quality for customers. Systems are not chains. They are wings. They allow your vision to survive beyond your stamina. The deeper truth is that without systems, you'll never own your life. Your work will own you. Building systems is not just about earning more money. It is about reclaiming your time, your health, and your freedom. Wealth is measured not by how much you make when present, but by how much you make when absent. You may think systems belong only to large corporations, with their departments, policies, and complex machinery. But systems can be built at any scale, even in your personal life. A system is simply a repeatable process that produces consistent results without demanding your constant attention. The moment you stop reinventing every wheel, you begin to free yourself from the prison of perpetual effort. Consider David, a freelance photographer in 2008. He booked every client himself, negotiated prices in endless phone calls, drove across town to scout locations, edited each photo manually, and delivered them on printed discs. His craft was excellent, but his business consumed him. One day, he decided to change. He created an online booking form with fixed packages and automated deposits. He outsourced editing to trained assistants and stored final images in digital galleries that clients could access instantly. Within a year, his income doubled while his workload shrank. He no longer managed chaos. He managed systems. This difference appears in numbers too. Suppose you are a caterer preparing food for events. Without systems, you shop personally, cook every dish, deliver each order, and handle cleanup. You might manage 2 events a week, earning $2,000. Now imagine you build a system. You create standardized menus, contract suppliers to deliver ingredients, hire staff trained in recipes, and partner with logistics for delivery. With the system, you can handle 10 events a week, bringing in $20,000. The workload does not multiply in proportion because you orchestrate processes instead of performing each step. The story of Angela illustrates this well. She once ran a small cleaning service. At first, she cleaned houses alone, moving from one address to another. Her earnings hovered around $30,000 annually. Then she documented each step of her work: how to dust, sanitize, organize supplies. She hired 3 employees, trained them with her manual, and advertised under a brand name. By the following year, Angela was managing appointments while her team handled the labor. Her income tripled, and her company gained a reputation for reliability because every client received the same standard of service. The key was not harder work, but smarter systems. Systems extend beyond businesses into personal wealth. Imagine someone who decides to save manually each month. He promises himself to set aside $500 if any remains after bills. Some months he succeeds, many months he fails. After 10 years, his savings are scattered and small. Another person automates transfers. On the first day of each month, $500 moves into an investment account before bills are even paid. That person never debates, never forgets, never struggles with willpower. After 10 years, $60,000 has been invested, not counting growth. The difference between the two is not discipline, but systems. Think about the farmer again. If he rises every dawn to carry buckets of water to each row of crops, his farm will always remain small. The moment he installs irrigation, his field expands. One farmer remains bound to buckets. The other frees himself to plant acres. The work of carrying water is honorable, but the system of irrigation creates abundance. Wealth follows the same principle. Without systems, you remain bound to buckets of effort. With them, you release streams that flow whether you are present or not. Another example comes from publishing. A writer who submits articles one at a time to local newspapers earns modest fees. Another writer, however, creates a digital platform that collects subscribers automatically, distributes newsletters on schedule, and charges small monthly fees. The system handles billing, delivery, and archiving. The writer spends the same energy writing, but the system multiplies reach and revenue. 10,000 subscribers at $5 each month means $50,000 flowing consistently, whether the writer is on vacation or asleep. The system sustains the income. You must recognize that every successful venture you admire, from a coffee chain to a technology giant, survives because of systems. The founder does not brew every cup or write every line of code. Processes, checklists, software, and people aligned in rhythm keep the machine alive. That is why the founder can step away and the enterprise continues. Until you build systems of your own, you'll always be a worker inside someone else's system, fueling their wealth while neglecting your own. The great mistake is believing systems strip away freedom. In truth, they create it. When your bills are automated, your investments consistent, your business procedures documented, your employees trained, you finally reclaim time to think, to rest, and to grow. Systems transform chaos into order and order into freedom. Without them, you will always be indispensable to your work, and therefore always enslaved by it. With them, you become free. Chapter 6. Redefining Wealth and Freedom. For most of your life, you were told that wealth was a number in a bank account. $1 million meant success, 10 million meant greatness, and anything less was struggle. Yet if you pause and look carefully, you begin to see how hollow that definition is. Money alone cannot measure freedom, nor can it guarantee happiness. Real wealth is not the constant chase for higher digits. It is the ability to live life on your own terms, free from the prison of relentless labor and the anxiety of scarcity. Consider Daniel, who worked tirelessly as a corporate lawyer in 2004. He earned over $300,000 a year, an income most people would envy. Yet his days began before dawn and ended after midnight. He was always tethered to his phone, his health declined, and his marriage dissolved under the pressure. Daniel had money but no freedom, and therefore no wealth in the truest sense. Across town lived Rosa, a modest woman who owned 3 small rental properties. Her annual income never crossed $100,000, but her mornings were calm, her afternoons free, and her evenings filled with family. Rosa traveled, volunteered, and pursued hobbies. Who, then, was wealthier? The answer is clear: Rosa, because she owned her time. Numbers prove the point. Imagine 2 men, each earning $100,000 annually. The first must work 60 hours a week at a stressful job, commuting 2 hours daily, tied to schedules he cannot control. The second earns the same amount from dividends, royalties, or rental income. He works 10 hours a week, with flexibility to rest, create, or travel. Though both report identical incomes, only one is truly free. Wealth is not just income, it is autonomy. This truth is echoed throughout history. Think of farmers who toil from sunrise to sunset, producing enough grain to feed entire regions, yet remain poor because they did not own the land. Their labor sustained empires, but their lives are fragile, always one bad harvest away from ruin. Contrast that with the landowners who spent far fewer hours in the fields, yet lived in abundance. The landowner's wealth was not measured in coins alone, but in the freedom to direct their lives. They controlled the soil, and therefore they control their time. Freedom emerges as the real currency. You may chase possessions, but without freedom, they become golden cages. A man may own a luxury car, but spend every day trapped in office to make the payments. Another may drive a modest vehicle, but have afternoons free to watch his children grow. Which life radiates true wealth? The car depreciates. The moments enrich forever. A story from 2011 illustrates this beautifully. Maria, a nurse, saved diligently for 20 years. She dreamed of retiring early, yet she always upgraded her lifestyle with each raise: a larger house, a newer car, fancier vacations. At 50, she still carried heavy debts, despite earning well. Meanwhile, her colleague Anna lived modestly, investing consistently in index funds and paying off her home early. Anna retired at 55, living comfortably on dividends and savings. Maria continued working into her 60s, exhausted. Anna was not richer because she earned more, but because she defined wealth as freedom, not as consumption. True wealth is measured by the days you control. It is the morning you wake without alarm, the decision to spend time with loved ones, the ability to walk away from toxic environments, the choice to rest when your body asks for it. When you realize this, the pursuit of endless money begins to lose its charm. The numbers matter, but only as tools. Their purpose is to serve your freedom, not to enslave you to greater pressure. And here lies the paradox. Society celebrates the image of relentless hustle, the late nights at the office, the endless grind, the overflowing calendars. But behind the applause often stands a person with no freedom. The applause does not pay back their lost health, their estranged families, their missed lives. Meanwhile, someone living quietly with enough assets to cover modest expenses may feel invisible to society, but is in fact the wealthiest of all. Because freedom, not recognition, is the ultimate prize. Once you begin to see wealth as freedom, you stop chasing more for its own sake. You start asking different questions. How much is enough to live the life I want? What structures will sustain me without constant presence? How can I reclaim time from endless obligations? These questions lead you away from the myth of riches through labor and toward the deeper, richer truth that life is measured not in hours worked, but in hours owned. The moment you redefine wealth as freedom, the landscape of your decisions changes. You stop chasing the endless climb of salaries and begin designing a life that sustains itself. The question shifts from how can I earn more to How can I live fully with what I build? That shift is revolutionary because it places you at the center of your own story instead of leaving you at the mercy of employers, clients, or markets. Think about Victor, who worked in finance during 2009. He earned nearly $500,000 a year, but his calendar was a prison. His days were stacked with meetings, his nights filled with emails, and his health deteriorated until he collapsed from exhaustion. He could afford luxury vacations, but never had the time to take them. Meanwhile, his neighbor Clara ran a small e-commerce store with automated systems. Her annual income was just $120,000, far less than Victor's. Yet Clara spent afternoons with her children, practiced yoga in the mornings, and traveled for weeks at a time while her business operated in the background. Victor was rich in digits, but Clara was wealthy in life. This is the essence of freedom, the ability to choose how you spend your hours. A paycheck that buys possessions but steals your time is a false bargain. You may impress others with what you own, but you lose the very thing you cannot replace: your days. Numbers tell the story clearly. If you earn $200,000 annually but work 70 hours a week, your income per hour of life is less than $55. If you earn $100,000 annually but work 20 hours a week, your income per hour of life is nearly $100. The second person is wealthier because wealth is not about totals but about margins of freedom. History provides endless examples. In ancient Rome, slaves built monuments through endless labor, yet held no wealth. Senators with fewer obligations directed resources and enjoyed lives of leisure. The difference was not effort, but control of time. In the 19th century, factory workers fueled industrial growth with sweat and long hours, but their lives remained precarious. Owners, who rarely worked the longest shifts, reaped both profits and choice. Again, wealth revealed itself not as toil, but as liberty. A smaller story from 2017 brings this close to home. Luis, a taxi driver, worked 12-hour shifts 6 days a week. His income reached around $60,000, but every dollar cost him hours he could never reclaim. His daughter grew up with photographs of him sleeping in the afternoons, too tired to play. Across town, Emily, who had built a small portfolio of digital courses, earned about the same $60,000 annually. Yet Emily's work hours averaged 10 per week. She spent mornings gardening, afternoons reading, and evenings with her family. Louise chased money. Emily built freedom. Both had equal incomes, but only one was wealthy. You must also see how redefining wealth alters consumption. Many people chain themselves to endless labor because they equate possessions with prosperity. A bigger house, a newer car, a closet of branded clothes. Each demands more income, which demands more hours, which strips away more freedom. But when you begin to value time over things, you resist this cycle. You may live in a modest home, drive a reliable but unremarkable car, and own fewer luxuries, yet you walk through your days unhurried, unburdened, unowned by your possessions. That is true wealth. Numbers once more illustrate the trap. A family earning $150,000 annually, but spending $149,000 lives in constant stress, one emergency away from ruin. Another family earning $80,000, but spending $50,000 builds savings, security, and freedom. The second family may appear less impressive, but they own their lives. The first family, though richer on paper, lives enslaved to expenses. This is a closing truth. Real wealth is the ability to wake each day and decide. Decide where to go, what to do, whom to see, and how to spend your time. It is not the endless chase of digits, but the calm possession of life. When you define wealth as freedom, you cease to be fooled by empty applause for hard work or by shiny objects that drain your spirit. You understand that the purpose of money is not to control you, but to serve you, to buy back your hours and hand them to the people and passions you love most. And so, as you step forward, remember this. Working harder alone will never make you rich. Building leverage systems and ownership may grant you income, but redefining wealth as freedom grants you life. That is a treasure worth seeking, the measure that truly counts, and the only definition of wealth that cannot betray you